Officer Brad Higgins thought he owned the streets of Chicago. He thought his badge was a shield that let him do whatever he wanted, to whoever he wanted. So when he saw a black woman wearing a coat he decided she couldn't afford, he didn't just insult her. He put his hands on her. He tore the jacket right off her back in front of a crowded restaurant, laughing as he cuffed her. But Brad made a fatal mistake. That woman wasn't just a patron. She was Federal Judge Jessica Ross, the head of the anti-corruption task force specifically investigating him. And she didn't just want an apology. She wanted his badge, his pension, and his freedom. The rain in Chicago was relentless that Friday evening, hammering against the panoramic windows of the Gilded Lily, one of the city's most exclusive steakhouses. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, smelling of aged mahogany, truffles, and expensive cologne. Jessica Ross sat alone at a corner table, sipping sparkling water. At 42, Jessica possessed a kind of quiet, terrifying grace. She wore a bespoke, cream-colored blouse, and, draped over the back of her chair, was her prized possession, a limited edition, structured blazer from an Italian designer, valued at over $3,000. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a gift from her late father, a reminder of how far she had come from the cramped apartment in the South Side. She was tired. Her docket at the federal courthouse had been brutal. For the past 6 months, she had been leading Operation Glass House, a covert investigation into the 24th Precinct's Narcotics Division. The file on her desk was thick with evidence, shakedowns, planted evidence, and racial profiling. The name at the top of that list? Officer Brad Higgins. Jessica was trying to decompress, but peace was short-lived. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open, and 3 uniformed officers walked in. The maitre d', a nervous man named Pierre, hurried over, but the lead officer waved him off with a sneer. It was him, Officer Brad Higgins. He was a massive man, thick-necked and red-faced, with eyes that scanned the room like a predator looking for a wounded gazelle. He wasn't here for a call. The Gilded Lily offered a 50% discount to law enforcement, a courtesy that Higgins abused weakly. His eyes swept past the wealthy businessmen in suits, past the tourists, and landed squarely on Jessica. She saw the recognition, not of her identity, but of her type. To Higgins, she was an anomaly. A black woman sitting alone in a 5-star restaurant, wearing clothes he likely assumed she couldn't afford. He nudged his partner, Officer Miller, and whispered something. Miller chuckled nervously, but Higgins didn't smile. He started walking toward her table. Jessica took a sip of water, her heart rate steady. She recognized the walk. It was the strut of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. "Excuse me," Higgins said, his voice booming enough to silence the nearby tables. He didn't ask, he demanded. Jessica looked up, her expression impassive. "Can I help you, officer?" "We've had reports of a stolen credit card being used in the area," Higgins lied. It was a lazy lie, one he had probably used 100 times. "We're checking IDs." Jessica glanced around. "Are you checking everyone's ID, or just mine?" The restaurant went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Higgins leaned in, placing his thick hands on her pristine white tablecloth, leaving a smudge. "Don't get cute with me, lady. You fit the description." "What description is that?" Jessica asked calmly. "A woman eating dinner." Higgins's face darkened. He wasn't used to pushback. A woman wearing high-end merchandise purchased with stolen funds. That jacket. He gestured to the blazer on her chair with his chin. "That's a nice coat. Saint Laurent? Gucci? Must have cost a fortune. Let me see the receipt." "I am not required to show you a receipt for my clothing," Jessica said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "And you are disrupting my meal." Unless you have a warrant or probable cause, I suggest you walk away." Higgins laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Probable cause is whatever I say it is. I think that jacket still has the security tag on it. I think you shoplifted it and ran in here to hide." "You are making a mistake," Jessica warned. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "A very expensive mistake. The only mistake," Higgins snarled, "is you thinking you belong in a place like this." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Pierre, the maitre d', hovered nearby, looking terrified. "Officer, please, Madame Ross is a regular." "Shut up, Pierre," Higgins snapped without looking at him. He fixed his gaze on Jessica. "Stand up." Jessica remained seated. "No," Higgins snapped. In one violent motion, he lunged forward. He didn't grab her arm. He grabbed the blazer draped over the chair. But Jessica, reacting on instinct, reached out to grab her property. "Get your hands off!" Higgins yelled. He yanked the jacket with all his strength. "Rippy!" The sound was sickeningly loud in the silent restaurant. The delicate silk lining and the high-quality wool of the shoulder seam tore apart. Higgins stumbled back, holding the ruined jacket, a piece of the sleeve dangling. The crowd gasped. A woman at the next table covered her mouth. Jessica stood up slowly. Her face was stone, but her eyes were burning. She looked at the ruined garment in Higgins's hand, a gift from her dead father, and then at the officer. "You just destroyed personal property," Jessica stated. "That is a tort. And since you are acting under the color of law, it is a civil rights violation." "I just confiscated evidence," Higgins shouted, trying to cover his blunder with aggression. He threw the torn jacket onto the floor, onto the dirty restaurant floor, and stepped on it. "And now you're under arrest for resisting an officer and theft." "Theft of what?" Jessica asked, stepping closer to him. She wasn't intimidated by his size. She stood 5'7", but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. Of this jacket," Higgins stammered, realizing he had no proof. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "I am advising you," Jessica said, her voice projecting to the back of the room where people had their phones out, recording. "Officer Bradley Higgins, badge number 4902. You are currently violating the Fourth Amendment. If you touch me, you will be adding assault and battery to your list of offenses." "I said turn around," Higgins roared. He grabbed her by the shoulder, spinning her around roughly. Jessica didn't fight back physically. She knew that would give him the excuse he needed to use his taser, or worse. She let him wrench her arms behind her back. He applied the handcuffs tight, too tight, the metal bit into her wrists. "You're hurting her," a patron yelled. It was a man in a business suit. "She didn't do anything. Back off or you're next," Miller, Higgins's partner, yelled at the crowd, hand hovering over his holster. Higgins marched Jessica toward the door, shoving her forward so she stumbled in her heels. As they passed the table, Jessica looked at the jacket on the floor, trampled and torn. "Pick it up," Jessica said to Miller. "What?" Miller blinked. "Pick it up," she commanded. "That is evidence." Miller, looking uncertain and sensing the mood of the room turning hostile, stooped down and picked up the ruined blazer. Higgins shoved Jessica out into the rain. The cold water soaked her silk blouse instantly. He pressed her face against the cold metal of the squad car hood. "Not so fancy now, are you?" Higgins whispered in her ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee and onions. "I'm going to book you as a Jane Doe. Let you sit in the tank for 48 hours with the junkies. By the time you get a lawyer, you'll be begging me to let you go." Jessica turned her head to the side, rain dripping down her nose. "Officer Higgins," she said softly, "I don't need a lawyer." Higgins laughed as he threw her into the back seat. "Everyone needs a lawyer, sweetheart." No, Jessica replied as the door slammed shut. I am the law. The holding cell at the 24th precinct smelled of bleach and despair. It was a Friday night, so the tank was full. There were 2 women arguing in the corner, a young girl crying on the bench, and a homeless woman sleeping on the floor. Jessica Ross sat on the cold steel bench, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She was soaked. Her blouse was translucent from the rain, sticking to her skin. She was cold, but the fire inside her kept her warm. They had taken her phone. They had taken her purse. Higgins had refused to let her make a call, claiming the phones were down, a classic tactic to disorient detainees. He had booked her as Jane Doe, refusing to look at the ID she had tried to present. He wanted to break her. He wanted her to scream, cry, and plead. Jessica did none of those things. She sat in silence, observing. She watched the officers processing people. She noted the lack of procedure. She noted how Officer Miller looked guilty, glancing at the holding cell every few minutes. 3 hours passed. Finally, the heavy metal door opened, and Higgins walked in, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He walked up to the bars of the cell and smirked. "Comfortable, Princess?" he asked. Jessica looked at him. "I would like to speak to the watch commander." "Commander's busy," Higgins said, taking a sip. "You know, I ran your prints. Weirdest thing? Nothing came up in the local system. You must be from out of town, or maybe you're just good at not getting caught." "My fingerprints are in the federal database," Jessica said, "not the local PD database. If you had run a proper background check through NCIC, you would know that." Higgins frowned. "Federal? What are you? A postal worker?" He laughed at his own joke. "Something like that," Jessica said dryly. "Look," Higgins sighed, feigning sympathy. "I'm a reasonable guy. You sign a statement admitting you stole the jacket and resisted arrest. Maybe I talk to the sergeant. We let you go with a misdemeanor. You pay a fine, you go home.